What if the Amazon rainforest isn't a pure wilderness at all, but a ruin? Not a ruin of stone temples and pyramids, a ruin of soil. Of invisible cities swallowed so completely that even the idea of them feels like a mistake. And what if the proof is still there, under your feet, in patches of earth that look like someone spilled bronze into the jungle? Because in parts of the Amazon, the ground is wrong. Most rainforest soil is thin and acidic. Leaves fall, rot fast, and the nutrients cycle quickly. It's a system that looks lush, but it's fragile. Clear the forest, and the life drains away. That's why, for a long time, people said the Amazon could never support large, dense societies. Small tribes, yes. Cities, no. The jungle was seen as a green ocean that could only be crossed, not settled. Then archaeologists and soil scientists started finding something that shouldn't exist there. They call it terra preta, black earth. But it isn't just darker, it's richer. It holds nutrients. It holds water. It stays fertile for centuries, sometimes for millennia. And mixed into it are strange ingredients: charcoal, broken pottery, fish bones, shells, plant remains. Not scattered like trash, but blended through the soil as if someone engineered it on purpose. You can walk through a forest, and the ground is pale, exhausted, typical Amazonian dirt. Then you step into a patch where the soil turns dark and fertile, like a garden bed. The plants change. The forest feels different. Farmers notice it immediately. It grows crops better. It resists being used up. It behaves like the opposite of what you were taught the Amazon was. And terra preta isn't rare in the way a single anomaly is rare. It shows up in many places, often near rivers, sometimes in huge areas. Some patches are small, like backyard plots. Others stretch for dozens of hectares. If this is human-made, then someone made a lot of it. And you don't make soil like this by accident. Now the mystery deepens. Because the Amazon holds other scars too. Geometric ditches and embankments cut into the earth. Perfect circles. Squares. Long straight lines that shouldn't survive in a rainforest. In the southwestern Amazon, especially in Acre, these geoglyphs appear when forest is cleared. They're so large you can see them from the air. Some are hundreds of meters across. Many are connected by straight roads or causeways. These aren't random, they look planned. And across different regions, people have found raised fields, canals, and causeways that manage water in floodplains. They found mounds and artificial terraces. They found evidence of controlled burning and forest management. They found clusters of sites that suggest networks, not isolated huts. Put the clues together, and a new idea forms in your mind. Maybe the Amazon wasn't a sparsely inhabited wilderness before Europeans arrived. Maybe it was a human-shaped landscape. Maybe it held large populations living in organized settlements. Maybe what looks like untouched nature is actually a regrown garden. And if that's true, the implications are huge. Because the Amazon is enormous. If a significant part of it was occupied or managed, then the number of people living there before contact could have been far higher than the traditional estimates. It would mean the collapse after European diseases didn't just erase communities. It erased an entire way of life so quickly that the forest rushed in and covered the evidence, like water swallowing a sinking city. It would also mean you've been picturing the rainforest wrong. Not as something humans failed to conquer, but as something humans once collaborated with. The more you investigate, the stranger it gets. Early European accounts describe dense riverside populations. The explorer Francisco de Orellana, traveling the Amazon in the 1540s, reported large settlements and many people along the river. For centuries, historians argued about this. Some said it was exaggeration, a fever dream propaganda. The rainforest couldn't feed that many. The soil couldn't support it. End of story. But terra preta doesn't care about your story. Terra preta behaves like a technology. Charcoal in soil, what scientists now often call biochar, can stabilize organic matter and help retain nutrients. It can create microhabitats for microbes. It can change how the soil holds onto phosphorus and nitrogen. And the charcoal in terra preta isn't from natural fires alone. It's mixed with household waste and organic material in a way that suggests repeated human activity. Then there's the pottery. Potsherds are everywhere in some terra preta sites, not a few pieces, massive amounts. That suggests people lived there long enough, in enough density, to generate mountains of broken ceramics that became part of the soil itself. And it isn't just they lived here, it's they improved here. Some researchers propose that ancient Amazonians intentionally created terra preta as a sustainable way to farm in a difficult environment. If that's true, you're looking at a civilization not despite the rainforest, but because of it. A civilization that didn't clear the jungle like a bulldozer. It edited it. It selected useful species. It planted and encouraged certain trees. It built soils and managed water. This connects to another unsettling idea. The forest you imagine as wild might be partly domesticated. Studies of tree distributions have suggested that certain useful species, like Brazil nut, are unusually common near archaeological sites, possibly reflecting ancient cultivation or management. That doesn't prove a kingdom, but it hints at a long partnership between humans and the forest. So the hypothesis takes shape. Not one lost city like Atlantis, something more realistic and more eerie, a patchwork of settlements, roads, engineered soils, and managed forests. A system, a network, a landscape with memory. And you start to wonder, if this much evidence can hide in plain sight, what else is under the canopy? At this point, you're not alone. Archaeologist Michael Heckenberger worked in the Xingu region of Brazil and documented complex, planned settlements with plazas, defensive ditches, and road networks, what he and others described as a form of garden city landscape. Not stone skyscrapers, but organized communities integrated with the forest. In Acre, archaeologists like Denise Sean studied geoglyphs and their surrounding sites, revealing large-scale earthworks and signs of long-term occupation. Soil scientists have analyzed terra preta for decades, trying to understand how it formed and why it lasts. And researchers like Anna Roosevelt challenged the old counterfeit paradise idea, the claim that the Amazon's environment prevented complex societies, by pointing to archaeological evidence of long occupation and social complexity in different parts of the basin. The hypothesis isn't fringe. The debate is about scale, density, and how to interpret what complex means in a rainforest. But then, about 70% of the way into this investigation, the story turns. Because the dominant scientific explanation isn't lost Amazonian kingdom. It's something more cautious. Most experts agree that many parts of the Amazon were home to significant, innovative societies. They also agree that humans shaped parts of the landscape. But kingdom implies centralized rule, unified territory, and state-level organization across vast areas. And that's where the evidence gets thinner. Terra preta, for instance, can form through long-term settlement and waste accumulation, not necessarily a grand soil-making program directed by elites. You can get engineered soil from centuries of daily life. Cooking fires, discarded bones, composting, burning, pottery breaking, rebuilding. Intentionality is possible, but not required for the soil to become extraordinary. Geoglyphs are striking, but their purpose is still debated. Some may be ceremonial enclosures, some may mark territory, some may be tied to gatherings rather than dense permanent urbanism, and many earthworks are not dated precisely enough to stitch into a single synchronized empire across the Amazon. They may represent different cultures, different times, different solutions. And the Amazon itself is not one environment. It's many. Floodplains, uplands, savannas, rivers, seasonal wetlands. Some areas could support larger populations than others. Much of the strongest evidence for dense settlement clusters near rivers and in certain regions doesn't automatically scale to the entire basin. In other words, science doesn't deny the scars. It questions the map you draw from them. The same facts that feel like a hidden kingdom can also be interpreted as something else. Multiple societies, some complex, some dispersed, shaping their local worlds in ways that don't resemble old world empires. Not a single lost crown, but many different hands. Now you're in the gray zone. Because the mainstream explanation has its own gaps. If these were only small, scattered groups, why do we see such extensive landscape engineering in some areas? Why build enormous geometric earthworks visible from the sky? Why create long, straight roads in a rainforest? Why do some regions show signs of coordinated planning, with settlements laid out in patterned ways? And if populations were large in certain corridors, how large could they get before you must admit something like regional political organization? You don't need a king to build a road. But roads imply cooperation. Cooperation implies rules. Rules imply leadership of some kind, even if temporary or distributed. On the other hand, if you claim a vast kingdom, you have to explain why there's so little durable architecture compared to places like the Andes or Mesoamerica. Maybe it's because they built in wood and earth, materials the rainforest can erase. Maybe it's because their monuments were living, orchards, managed groves, soil itself. But that answer can also become too convenient. When the absence of evidence is always explained by the environment, the hypothesis becomes hard to falsify. And then there's the darkest part of the story: disease. After European contact, epidemics spread faster than explorers did. Entire regions could have collapsed before they were even documented. If that happened, the forest would have had only a few generations to reclaim fields and roads. In ecological time, that's nothing. In human time, it's a total wipe. So you're left staring at the Amazon like a detective, staring at a crime scene after a flood. There are footprints in the mud, a few broken tools, strange patterns on the ground, enough to know something happened here, not enough to say exactly what. Maybe the Amazon once held societies far larger and more organized than the old textbooks allowed. That much seems increasingly hard to deny. But whether that amounts to a lost kingdom depends on what you mean by kingdom, and how much certainty you demand before you give the forest a history as dramatic as its beauty. And that brings you to the uncomfortable philosophical question underneath all of this. What does it mean for a place to be natural? If humans can build soils that last thousands of years, then the boundary between nature and civilization blurs. If forests can be curated like gardens, then wilderness becomes a kind of memory. And if an entire human world can be swallowed so completely that later generations call it empty, then history isn't just what happened. It's what survived. You stand in the Amazon and you can't see the past the way you can in a fallen castle. You can't touch stone walls. You can't walk through a doorway. You can only read the bronze-black stains in the soil. And maybe that's the most haunting possibility of all, that some civilizations don't end with ruins reaching for the sky, but with a forest quietly growing over them, until the only monument left is the ground itself, still dark, still fertile, still keeping a secret.